Good evening, everyone. It is nice being in Rome. We are all happy to visit Rome whenever the chance presents itself. My name is Cosmina Simion. I'm the managing partner at Simion and Partners, a law firm in Romania, focusing, between others, on the gambling industry, which we approach from most of its angles, whether we have the perspective of the operators, the suppliers, or the industry associations. Today, however, I come under a different hat, the hat of IMGL, International Masters of Gaming Law. This is an IMGL Masterclass. IMGL is a not-for-profit association comprising more than 300 members worldwide. We are proud to gather together, recognize leading experts in their jurisdictions, and the jurisdictions are many, whether we are across the pond or in Europe or Asia, Australia. We are at the heart of the developments in gambling law. Our core mission is education, and for that we host two major events. One typically takes place in the US, just happened last week in Tampa Bay, and the other one happens in Europe, and this year it'll be again in Rome in early October. Our president these past years is also Italian, Quirino Mancini, for the ones who know him. So we have many links to your lovely country this year in particular. Our members are regularly speaking at IMGL Masterclasses. We do publish magazines, and my colleague there, Phil, has magazines to show you, and also leaflets with information about membership. And now, without further ado, I'm going to present my fellow panelists. Some have traveled from far away, such as Danielle Bush there. She's coming from Canada. And she's a senior counsel with McCarthy Tétrault. She offers expert advice and guidance on regulated industries with particular focus on gaming, alcoholic beverages, and consumer products. She's also advising on protection and licensing of technology and other intellectual property issues. I have Bill Pascrell here. He's coming from the US, New Jersey. He's a strategic advisor and public government affairs professional, generally a lobbyist you want to have next to you. We are missing Laura Aria, a member of AGCOM. Unfortunately, she cannot make it today, but to fill her shoes, we have Stefano Bordoni here, who's a managing partner and founder at Bordoni and Partners, highly regarded in the gaming and betting industry in Italy. I'm sure you know him. He's also, throughout his years, dedicated time to studies of gaming, having been the vice president of the Italian Center for Studies on Gaming at some point in his career. Last but not least, we have Pieter Remmers, who, for me at least, does not need an introduction whenever we talk about responsible gaming and advertising. Pieter has been with Assissa consultancies for more than 25 years. He was always interested in studying gambling and responsible gambling in particular. He's based in Amsterdam, but I see him everywhere I go when we talk about this subject. So I'm very happy that I have such good experts next to me. We are all members of IMGL, and we are going to talk today about advertising bans that have happened lately and keep happening lately in the world, and what comes next after advertising bans. It seems that we are having a domino effect where we started with Italy back in 2018 with the Dignity Decree, which has shocked the world at the time. And I was wondering if Stefano can give us an overview of what has happened since 2018 and what is next to come.
Yes, thank you, Cosmina. Hopefully, I will try to summarize all the situation. First of all, as you said in the introduction, I shall report the message of Mrs. Aria, the commissary member of the board of AGCOM, that is the authority of communication in Italy, that is supervising all the activities that are related to communication in gaming as well. The authority is composed at his management level by the president and 4 commissaries, let's say, so members of the board, one of which is Mrs. Aria, who couldn't be present today. Her message is that whilst the European Union has not a position that is homogeneous throughout the community, the conclusion of the thoughts, let's say, through a recommendation, a resolution that are almost dated, because the newest one is 2014, is the recommendation, is concluding that there is not a need of a compulsory provision against communication on gaming. On the other hand, the Italian government in 2018, through the issuing of the decree that you mentioned, so-called Dignity Decree, has instead prohibited quite dramatically the publicity and advertising on gaming. And AGCOM is the authority that shall overview and control the application of this ban. The conclusions, I ran to the conclusions of Mrs. Aria because she made a quite long analysis, very interesting, but I can't go through it now. And the conclusion are there is a need of reorganizing the whole sector, not especially relating to communication and publicity, but as a consequence. And this is ongoing as the government has taken the burden of reorganizing the gaming sector, has already started with the first decree on online. And this, as a consequence, will have effects also on communication, but step by step. At the moment, the Dignity Decree is valid and enforced, and therefore the authority has taken action against some many violations that were individuated in the platform or in the RABs, I would say, of web communication throughout the community, and that are driving messages to Italy. And because of lack of overview, lack of control, and therefore there have been also legal cases on the competent courts. But the message is proposing to review the whole organization of gaming and the communications as a consequence. So it is a proposing message. On the other hand, as you were saying, and I don't want to steal your more time, the Dignity Decree is in force. This means that there are actions that have been taken by the authority, and there are actions to be taken by the operators and by those who are working on communication, because on the other hand, as the European community itself has stated with the resolution recommendation, there is a need of communication, especially which game is legal and which is not in all the regulated countries, and consequently what is allowed and what is not, how the messages that are not allowed because of the ban are a potential source of damage to the minors especially, but citizens. This is the application of the ban. The point of balance, and this is my personal opinion, has still to be found. I think, but is again out of the message of Mrs. Aria, this is my personal position, is that at the moment there is an unbalanced situation, whereas the decree is enforced as a total ban, and there is not a direct effect on the benefits that should take to the public.
I was reading at some point that the problem gamblers in Italy, before this dignity decree at least, were at about 3%. That was the data that I could find. Was there any impact after the dignity decree?
I think that is a quite high number. I think that is the number, first of all, this is a very, as you well know, a very complicated issue to discuss, and Pieter could illustrate that better than me. But the distinction, main one, is between problematic and at-risk gamblers. But I would say 1.5, 1.8, not 3%, including both. That means that there are also situations that have to be tested on field, let's say.
You touched on this point, so I was thinking maybe we want to discuss, all of us, what is the difference between a heavy gambler and a problem gambler. So I guess that is, one is a high roller and one is a problem gambler.
Shall I start? Honestly, the term heavy gambler is not being used in research, so to say, because then we talk about pathological gamblers in the old days and nowadays about someone with a gambling disorder, so to say. There's one thing I always think at the very same time when we talk about problem gamblers and pathological or people with a gambling disorder, is that I think we should turn it around and look at the things that have to deal with a positive play as well. Because what we really always do is focus on those who have a problem and we have to do something about it. And then usually it's done not on the basis of facts, so to say, not on the basis of things that we know. By the way, we know a lot, but we know so little at the very same time, I sometimes say. Maybe the problem is not as really big as we usually think it is. So there are still, I'm in this business for 35 years, responsible gambling business 35 years. But we still don't know a lot. So we have to improve and increase that. And then the question is if a new law helps with that. That's how it started in Italy. That's what you've seen in a number of other countries. In my country, 2 days ago, there was a discussion in Parliament. Maybe you've read it in the newspapers,
Indeed.
Whatever. 10 out of 14 proposals are being accepted. but they are being accepted by politicians who have no idea what they are talking about. So the good thing then is that at the end of the day, the Ministry of Justice can decide whether he would like to accept all those changes. So that means there's still a lot of talk to be done. The question then is, do we need to regulate everything? The short answer is no. Don't over-regulate. So taking into account the things you know, taking into account research, evidence-based, and if that's not available, best practice. But these things are important for the near future. Could say a lot more, I stop here.
Yeah, well, after Italy, I think the next big one was the royal decree in Spain, and then it went down to Belgium and so on and so forth. And the data that I was reading was 3% in Italy. I will repeat it even though Stefano says it depends on how you look at that percentage. But the others were down to 0.3, 0.2, and still the measures that they were taking were similar. So that comes to, you know.
But if you look in general at let's say, percentages, they are not always the same, but they are close to each other, so to say. There's not a lot of difference between all those different countries, to be honest.
Indeed. And the fear is that when you over-regulate and when you introduce bans like that, you know, the gamblers, the problem gamblers, yeah, will still play. So they will go to unregulated market. So what you are trying to achieve as a politician, hopefully this is what you're trying to achieve, the better good for the consumer is exactly the opposite. Bill, I think you want to say something.
I'll be happy to. Thank you, Cosmina, and I want to thank the organizers and Alessio for having me. It's a pleasure to be here today. I just want to let you know I apologize for not being able to speak my native language. My grandparents on both sides are from Italy, Caserta del Vecchia on my dad's side, and Tuscany on my mother's side. And I'm a proud Italian-American. I've had the privilege of serving on panels with Pieter, and certainly I know Danielle and Cosmina, and happy to meet you, Stefano. This is a very important issue for the global gaming industry. I was, 30 years ago, a lawyer, lobbyist, regulatory affairs advisor for brick-and-mortar casinos. I had the privilege to lose all those clients when I was hired by 38 offshore illegal books, had to get an attorney general opinion from Eric Holder, who was the attorney general under Barack Obama, and I'm a Democrat, to allow me to have that as a client and accept their funds. Why? Because they wanted to bring online gaming and sports betting and exchange wagering and horse racing to America. Now, I see a lot of smiles because America likes to pound their chest how great we are. We're learning from our European brothers and sisters every day. Our online gaming industry has just celebrated its 10-year anniversary. And the repeal of PASPA, we just celebrated our 5th anniversary. I had the privilege, lost all those brick and mortar clients, my partners wanted to fire me, but then companies like Playtech and Sporttech and Poker Stars, et cetera, some who are in the room, allowed me to be the quarterback to bring this to America. But what I never realized when I was working on the legislation, and we're sort of like, America is somewhat like Europe in this regards. We have no federal laws really, other than the Indian Tribal Gaming Act. It's 50 different states, all of which, like Utah, Alaska, and Hawaii, don't have any gaming. Texas has no casinos. They have horse racing. So it's a hodgepodge. And it's frustrating for my European clients when they first come over. I had the privilege one of my longest serving clients, Entain, who you're all familiar with. I'm on their Global Foundation for Responsible Gaming Integrity and Compliance with Martin Lichka and a former New York Giant Super Bowl champ, Amani Toomer. So I am commissioned to kind of talk about this issue across the globe. I want to be efficient, but I'm passionate about this issue. Little did I think until my two oldest children, Billy and Christopher, who were betting, I didn't know this, illegally online in America when they were in their teens. Billy's 30, Christopher's 27. So we're talking about 10 plus years ago. And they said to me, Dad, you're the guy that's bringing all this gambling into America. What are you doing serving on NCLG's, National Council of Problem Gambling Federation, or the Entain Foundation? Why do you care about responsible gambling, as we call it? And it is gambling. Those in America that try to refer to it to soften it as responsible gaming are doing a disservice. It's on the industry's hide to do what Cosmina has so elegantly teed up here. We need to get ahead of the curve and self-regulate. Why? I'll give you a real good example, and hopefully we can bring Danielle into the conversation because she's a phenom in this space. Congressman Paul Tonko represents one of the largest racetracks, horse racetracks in America, Saratoga. A beautiful legacy track, wonderful. If you haven't gone, I encourage you to. He introduced a bill in February of last year, and that bill was called Betting on the Futures Act. It would ban advertising in gaming in America. So Martin Lichka and I drove down to DC. Actually, we took the train, not too far from where we live in northern Jersey, to meet with him. He cares about mental health. He cares about addiction. We tried to educate him in a respectful way, and he learned a lot. He's using data that oftentimes gets misused by self-interested parties who are trying to make the gambling addiction problem more than it is. And I take it seriously. The numbers, as Pieter eloquently said, are pretty axiomatic across the globe, whether you're in Oceania, LATAM, North America, Europe, it's hovers around 2%. But Paul Tonko, after that meeting, he must have learned a little bit. He went to meet with a doctor that helped the government with ad bans on tobacco and alcohol. We should not be compared to that. The brick-and-mortar casino industry globally treated the problem gambler as a VIP. Oh, Bill, you have a problem? Here's another marker. Keep going at it. The problem is no one was tracking that, because how do you? You go into a casino, you show your ID, and you throw up whatever money you want. But in the online space, the power of online, we should be trumpeting across every jurisdiction. We track and monitor our players. We need to be more concerned about our players and treat them as consumers so that when they get into tripping over the markers of harm, we're doing something affirmatively and not checking a box by putting a 1-800 number on our consumer-facing page, because that does very little to solve the problem.
Danielle, I think you have been given the beaten.
I think so. Hi, everyone. I'm based in Toronto, in Ontario, and we just celebrated the 2nd anniversary of the opening of the online gaming space in Ontario. The government has just doubled its revenue over the past year. and it's a very handsome 20% of GGR that they're getting. They now are, and the numbers may have pushed them up another notch, but 3 months ago they were already the 4th largest gaming jurisdiction by revenue in North America after 2 years. So it's going very well, and I would say that generally speaking, people are content with the approach that our regulator has taken with respect to advertising. And I'm going to digress here. Canada inevitably goes down the middle. We were a British colony, but we're right beside the United States. So in almost every aspect, we're a hybrid of the American approach and the British approach. And you see that happening with gaming and with advertising, in particular of gaming. The CEO of the AGCO, when we were about to open the market, we had a lot of discussions ahead of time about how to thread that needle. And they went ahead and they said, we're relying on the industry to figure out how to meet the standards we've set. We followed the UKGC in that, not prescriptive approach, it's standards-based. So they said to everybody in the industry, here are the things we're worried about. So here are the standards we're setting for your behavior. You figure out how to meet the standards because you know what we're worried about. And it's up to you to figure out how to comply. That's a problem for a lot. I mean, it's so much easier to just have a set of rules you follow, and if you follow the rules, you don't get in trouble. So you did see just over the last year, I mean, certainly once the market opened, the first thing that the AGCO focused on, and they told the industry well ahead of time they were going to be watching, and it was the advertising. Because there are some pretty clear guidelines about no bonuses being offered to the public in general in order to draw them onto your site. Again, it's was annoying, but not that hard to navigate. And so they made an example of the first few operators. I think there were, most of them my clients, unfortunately, were fined. Not a lot. I mean, right now, the top fine's been $100,000. But it was quite interesting because it was so new. They had come to us and they'd said, what do you think about this? And we'd said, right on the line, if you're prudent, you won't, but if you want to push the envelope, they did push the envelope. They got fined. But, the AGCO is, in my view, one of the best regulators in the world. They are very business friendly. They want you to sit down with them ahead of time and have a discussion. They want to talk to you afterwards about the lessons you've learned. They want to continue to educate the industry. So I would say that right now we have a fairly moderate approach to advertising in Ontario anyhow. I don't think a ban is anywhere in the cards, but they're going to start focusing on things as soon as they see a problem coming up in the market. And to a certain extent, if they're getting political pressure, you may see them ratcheting up the pressure on certain points. But again, it's the other thing to consider here is that there was a small group of us involved from the very beginning with the regulator. Way ahead of time, we talked about tax rates, what the market should look like, things like that. And one of the people at the table, I think there were 12 of us, was the head of the Responsible Gaming Council of Canada. And so Shelley White was involved from the very beginning with the discussion of the standards around advertising and marketing. She had a huge amount of influence on the position the government took right out of the gate. She's still keeping a close eye on it. And Responsible Gaming Council actually was the organization that the UKGC brought over from Canada to help them with the standards. So there's a lot of continuous feedback from the RGC as well.
It is said that problem gamblers are more receptive to advertising than, the others. But does that mean that the problem is solved? No. Has data shown us that?
Maybe just to first say something about what we know from research. There is, I always say it, there's a famous professor from Sweden called Per Binde, University of Linköping, and he has collected all the papers that have been written regarding the influence of advertising and marketing. I think there are around 160 or so. Very briefly, his conclusion is advertising has not too much influence on the general public, so to say. It has an influence on young people, vulnerable people, and those who have a gambling problem already. But that's obvious, so to say. So then the question is, how are you going to organize it, and what do you allow and what you don't allow, so to say? But it all has, I want to come back a little bit to your comments regarding Ontario, because people who know me know that we also do a lot regarding accreditation and certification. There are a lot of companies here in Italy that we do. And there are companies who have a license in Ontario that would like us to do accreditation. But your regulator doesn't want us to do that. Anyway, I've said.
We'll talk about that.
If I may, Cosmina?
Please.
I want to be very clear. I come from a political family, and there's relevance here. My father, Bill Pascrell, William J. Pascrell Jr., I'm the third, and there's a fourth who's in Australia, general counsel for a public company in the gaming industry from Australia. My father was the sponsor with Barney Frank, the former congressman from Boston, of the online gaming bill. My dad wouldn't know what online gaming was if it slapped him in the face. Why do I tell you that story? It's self-deprecating, not to humiliate my dad. These bills are hundreds of pages long when they're federal bills. Thank God that bill didn't pass. Legislators oftentimes do knee-jerk. They read an article in the paper. A constituent calls, my son, daughter, mother, father, sister, brother, aunt, uncle got into harm's way. Okay, there's ways to solve and address that. Innovation, which there's a lot of companies here very familiar with, folding that into the RG process, prevention, and finally treatment. Governments don't want gambling addicts going on to the public dole. Advertising bans are the worst remedy to solve this problem. The worst remedy. Why? Because it's going to drive most customers to the black market. Advertising, if done responsibly, can help educate the public. Not talking about bonus bets and free bets and all that. I think America has started off relatively well. We have an exploding sports betting market. iGaming is only in 7 states now, Rhode Island the most recent. But we have 39 states plus the District of Columbia who have legal, regulated sports betting, most of them also online. Some states like Tennessee that don't have casinos only have online, no retail. North Carolina just launched 30 days ago, successfully. But when you creep into territory as a politician, you need to understand the impact you're having. Meteoric tax rates and advertising bans and overregulation push customers, punters, if you will, to the black market. And it's axiomatic. And I'll give you a reverse example of this that just happened in the 8th largest economy in the world, California. California only has tribal casinos, racetracks, and card rooms. No commercial casinos. I did an opinion for DraftKings and FanDuel 4 years ago. Not a legal opinion, a political opinion on how to approach California. They paid me very well. And they took my memo and put it on the shelf, and then proceeded to advocate. And I'd be shocked if anyone in this room in the gaming industry doesn't know this story, but I want to put an exclamation point on it. Proposition 27 was the industry-backed proposition. Tribal gaming, which are the locals, put up Proposition 26 to oppose it. You have to get almost 1 million signatures to get on the ballot in California. 600 million US dollars were spent by the industry, predominantly FanDuel and DraftKings. And you know what it got at the ballot box? Because you need a referendum in California like we did in New Jersey. 18% of the vote. To me, that's political malpractice. They tried to do it again this year, 2 years later, and I think they're getting educated now. A lot of the points I raised in that memo. But why do I say that? I'm in a taxi with my friends, you know them, from Continent 8. We're at an event in Newport Beach, California. We're going to dinner. The cab driver, Uber driver, if you will, pulls up and, hey, what do you guys do for a living? I'm a stockbroker, but the market's down, so I have to supplement my income. What do you guys do? We're in the gaming industry. And Continent 8 explained what they do, data security and servers and high-tech stuff. And I explained what I am. He said, oh, that's interesting. I said, did you vote on the ballot referendum? He goes, what are you talking about? What ballot referendum? $600 million spent by the industry. And this gentleman, who was highly educated, didn't even know there was a ballot referendum. And then I said, do you bet on sports? Just about every day. You know where he bets? Bovado, Bodog, and many other familiar names. Why does he do that? Because there's no regulated market explaining who the legitimate companies are versus the illegitimate companies. Nobody's going to know if this gentleman goes off the rails, but you do have the benefit of that by regulating the industry. Hopefully California will get their act together, but the politicians in California are scared to death to put another ballot referendum up after what happened and after the money that was spent in a very irresponsible way. So back to the premise of this panel, ad banning, which Congressman Tonko has now realized is a bit of a mistake. He just introduced a new bill. The bill's not out yet. He had a press conference 3 weeks ago. His bill now has modifications, not an absolute ban. He's calling it responsible advertising. But what he put into the bill at the federal level are deposit limits, daily deposit limits. We're going down to Washington in 2 weeks, Martin Litchka and I, to explain to him, be very careful about arbitrary, as Pieter said, deposit limits or spend limits, because it will just push a lot of punters that want to continue to gamble off to the black market where there are no ways to track markers of harm.
Or joint deposit limits. That's even worse.
Correct. Correct.
Yeah, and in a practical situation in the Netherlands, if they allow all these limit setting, it means that I think something like €7.52 is allowed spending per day. What are we talking about?
Yeah.
Well, you touched upon, the advertising, which is, in the end, it's the core of any trade. So you ban advertising, you put everything into unregulated field. I mean, people will play, will continue to play, will be unprotected, and the state will not monetize that activity at all. And advertising is means to send messages as well, whether we talk about political messages, whether we talk about safety messages, whatever we are talking about. And this is where it seems that we are aligned into thinking that where regulation needs to intervene, this is one field that they could intervene for the better, not for the worse, as they are doing today. Another point that you touched upon was technology, generally speaking, and now we are talking more and more about online rather than brick and mortar. And when we talk about online, we track everything, and we can impose regulation into how to track the behavior and how to identify the problem gamblers, and then think about what we do with that. And with all the money in the world that were spent, not just in California, on this issue, I guess if we were going into that direction, we would have better success. Do you think?
Definitely. A well-addressed advertising is beneficial because it limits the illegal offer. It drives to land on the regulated operators that have already rules to respect. And the more they respect it, the more they are chosen by public, the better result we will have. So this explains why banning advertising towards regulated operators, high-level operators, is controversial and is not beneficial.
Maybe just a thought. Because if we talk about advertising and marketing, and if you look at the past, it was always a kind of global offer that we had for everyone, and you could pick whatever you needed yourself. What I have seen in the past, let's say 10 years or so, is that more and more often marketing tools are personalized, individualized, so every individual player gets his own proposition. I think, and that's what I told most of these companies that we are working with, that also regarding responsible gambling or the positive play, things should be individualized. So it means that technology plays a role to a certain extent, not to the 100%, because I know operators as well that say, yeah, but we have AI tools, so we don't have to talk anymore to them. I mean, that's not the case. So you have to learn how to talk to your customer as well, because that's very important. At least if you look at your long-term vision. If we want to go back to Nelson Rose, we all know, is a member of IMGL as well. Nelson Rose, when I started in this business in the 1990s, Nelson predicted the gambling industry will be illegal in 30, 40 years from now on. So we have 6 more years to go, maximum. The only problem was in the 90s there was no internet gambling, so he wasn't aware of that. Anyway, maybe Nelson is right, so we will see in 5 or 10 years from now.
We'll go into gaming, video gaming, I'm sure.
I just wanted to, you raised an interesting point about personalizing the marketing. I can see that being a bit of a double-edged sword. Because if you were sending a player personalized offers geared directly towards this individual, and he ends up in a significant hole and brings an action against the company, it's a lot harder to say, we didn't know, we couldn't have known anything about you, when in fact you knew a lot about him and you encouraged him. You should have also known that he had the propensity.
Obviously, definitely, you have to have a file on an individual. You have to know in what way he shows his playing behavior, so to say. So that also means not marketing to the end of the day because we need his money. No, it has an effect on the way you market and the way you advertise the things that you do as well.
It's interesting. We're just seeing now, we're 2 years into the market in Ontario, and my firm is already representing clients in 4 different lawsuits brought by players. So we're talking, 24 months, and we're already getting actions. They're all responsible gaming actions. One of them, there are 14 defendants. So the player was on a lot of sites, and you know, and we're talking about $1 million loss, and that is, you know, we are just hoping as an industry that the press doesn't get hold of it, because they will make hay out of that one. But again, it's just all for RG, all for, you should have known enough about me to know that I shouldn't be allowed, you know, and so it's very interesting. We are creeping along. I don't know how you found the litigation in your jurisdictions. I mean, we are just learning in ours.
Well, there have been a number of court cases, especially in Germany and Austria, to be honest, later on in some of the Nordic countries as well. And when I just mentioned the newspaper of 2 days ago, I saw yesterday's newspaper as well, and there's a court in the Netherlands, a lower court somewhere in the eastern part of the country, that has told bwin and PokerStars, to be honest, to pay back the money the player had lost. Honestly, this is not the very last time that there will be discussions about it, but it's the very first time a judge decided in my country that the money, which was around 150,000 euros, so it's not, well, it's still a lot of money. Okay, so we will have to see in which way we are going.
Yeah. Pieter, which was the logic of the decision that you just mentioned? Why they were imposed to refund?
It always has to do with responsibility and responsibility of the operator. So maybe I should say, when I did a lot of presentations in my whole life, my very last slide always was, but at the end of the day, it's the individual player who is responsible for his or her own behavior. I'm not allowed to say that anymore, because my regulators tell the operator, you are responsible.
No, in fact, the reason for my question is, as you have well understood, that getting back to advertising, probably information could have been a reason for deciding against the operator. So lack of information. But if there is a ban of information, then it's a dog that bites its own tail.
Well, there were discussions at some point about payment processors being involved in the game, you know, and setting limits on your expenditure. And my favorite line at the time, such as Pieter's, was like, you know, there should be a limit that I can put on myself for spending money on shoes. So it is the responsibility of the player as well. But then again, you know, there is an overarching probably responsibility on the one who's making money on, you know, the play. So from this perspective, we as an industry maybe have overdone it at some point, and now we are suffering because the politicians are making their own gains into imposing limits for the political gain. And the wheel is turning now. It's hard to stop it.
Well, the whole issue of RG globally, and I point to the Israeli technology that Entain is using with ARC, Accountability, Responsibility, and Care, which has 30 some odd markers of harm to track some of the more obvious ones and some more sophisticated, like advert bans. Putting in limitations on the mass public for deposits is a fool's errand, because it might apply to a small group of folks, but those folks that have problems are going to go to the path of least resistance, and you're going to drive the bigger punters directly to the black market. They're not, I mean, Tonka's talking about 5 deposits a day, which can't exceed $200. Are you kidding me? I mean, it's crazy. You saw what just happened in America with Jonte Porter. Not a superstar player, but a young man that really violated an important NBA rule not only betting on games he played in, but giving information to punters. And then we also saw what happened last week with Ohani, the Dodgers player who's been quoted as more innovative and impactful than Babe Ruth, Major League Baseball, which I know is not big in Europe necessarily. But his translator and right-hand man bilked $16 million off of Ohani. Ohani had no idea what was going on. And then you get the stir about, oh yeah, he knew, of course. The US Justice Department indicted his translator, not the California prosecutor or AG. So this is becoming a matriculating problem. And the other thing I say, and it's maybe I'm the master of the obvious, and I'll take that criticism, but go back for those of us that are follically challenged or gray-haired, okay? Go back 15 years. Go to ICE, which I've been going to for 18 years now, and I've seen some of you at ICE. There was never a panel on RG. Now every conference not only has panels, multiple panels, but they now have a full day of player protection symposium. There's a lot of discussion on it, but I think we talk too much, and I'm guilty of this too, about the problem, and we're not talking about solutions. And if we don't cut to the chase and expedite solutions, the regulators are gonna come back and slam the industry in whatever jurisdiction you're in. You're seeing that in Australia now in a significant way.
I think we ran out of time, so unless there are some questions from the public, I think we should wrap it up. Any last words from either of you?
I would like to say one word regarding Rome, because we are here in Rome. It was announced that IMGL has a conference in Rome in October.
That's right.
But in my voluntary hours, I'm the Secretary General of the European Association for the Study of Gambling. And guess what? We organize a conference in Rome between the 10th and the 13th of September, so to say. And we decided to do that 2 years ago already, when I wasn't aware of this one. But if anyone wants to have any information on my voluntary job regarding that conference in Rome, I will be happy to share that.
Well, it seems that we are becoming a very popular site for gaming, which we haven't been for decades, I would say.
We are all concentrated. All roads go to Rome. Well, thank you very much. It was a pleasure having you here next to me. And I hope the audience has enjoyed our discussion as much as we did. Thank you.